All right, today we're going to go ahead and get into section 7.3 notes. All right, so today is going to be a focus on word problems. All right, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to create a right triangle from a word problem and then use sine, cosine, or tangent to solve it. All right, so there's two words here. There's angle of elevation and angle of depression. All right, so angle of elevation is sort of when we're looking up from inside the triangle. Angle of depression is when we're looking down but we're outside the triangle. So if you look at this picture here, what happens is we have these two dotted lines that are technically parallel lines. All right, so if we picture those two dotted lines as being solid lines, we've got two parallel lines running the same direction. All right, what technically happens in this picture is it gets split by a transversal. All right, and what happens is you'll notice in the picture angle 1 and 2 become equal. So angle 1 and 2 become equal to each other. Now, technically what happens here is we form a triangle, and you'll notice angle of elevation is the angle down at the bottom of our triangle. Angle of depression falls outside of the triangle, but it would technically be equal to angle 1 because they're alternate interior. So whether you see the word angle of elevation or angle of depression, when we see that word, angle of elevation or depression, we want to put our angle down here where the X is. All right, it's always going to technically be the same thing because angle of depression, if it falls into the triangle, would technically be the same as angle of elevation. If you look at this picture to the right with the transversals, or two parallel lines and a transversal, you'll notice that it formed two equal angles, and those equal angles are technically alternate interior angles. Now, if you remember from first semester, alternate interior angles are equal. They're equal. All right, so when you see the word angle of elevation or angle of depression, we want to think about putting our angle down at the bottom by the X. I encourage you to draw your triangle the same way each time. Now, before we get into some word problems, let's look at some key words that will be, or where we would label our picture based on some key terms that they give us in the question. So, if they give us a question and it tells us how tall, that would go on the vertical part. If it says how high, that would go on this vertical part. If the question said height, we would label it on the vertical part. If the question said vertical, we would label it on the vertical part. If it said altitude, we would label it on the vertical side of our triangle. And if it said above ground. Now, if the question says words like ramp, we would label it on this side, the hypotenuse. If it said the word diagonal, if it said hypotenuse, if it said ladder, all right, those are keywords that we would label on that part of our picture. If they use the word base, we want to label the bottom. If they use the word foot, ground, horizontal, these are all keywords that we would label this side of the triangle. All right, so let's go ahead and go through some examples. We're going to go through 4 word problems, and remember we're going to be drawing a triangle and then labeling it, and based on our labels we're going to solve using sine, cos, or tan. If they give us some of these keywords, that'll help us label our picture. All right, here we go. Let's do number 1. Again, all of these are going to be by a triangle. So before I do my word problem, I'm going to go ahead and draw my triangle. It says that the observation deck of the John Hancock building, so we've got a big building here. And again, you can get as artistic as you like. Some of my drawings might be a little better than yours. That's okay. All right, so it says that the building is 1,030 feet above the ground. So above the ground would be the vertical part. Now, there's a person standing 1,500 feet from the base of the building, so the base would be the bottom. The question says, what is the angle of elevation? So the angle of elevation would be this angle inside that's looking up. Well, if you start at your angle and label your sides, we have O, we have H, and we have A. There's nothing on the H, so if I'm using SOHCAHTOA, I have O and A, so I'm going to use a tan. Tan of my angle equals opposite over adjacent. Remember, when X is on this side, we're going to press second tan to get the inverse. And then we're going to put in 1,030 divided by 1,500 and press enter. When you do that, it gives us 34.5 degrees. All right, so we're going to form a triangle, draw it, label your picture, and then go back and solve it. All right, let's go ahead and try another example. All right, I know it's a word problem and we're solving right triangles, so I'm going to draw my triangle the same way. I'm going to label my picture. A surveyor is 130 feet away, so I have a person that's surveying 130 feet away. The tower, it says, is 86 feet tall, so I've got a tower over here, 86. Find the angle of elevation. All right, so this one turns out to be similar to the first one. Let's label our sides. We have O, H, and A. There's nothing on H, so I'm left with O and A, so we're going to do a tan of the angle equals opposite over adjacent. Remember, we're going to press second tan to get the inverse, and then on a calculator, we're going to throw in 86 divided by 130. Press enter, and it should tell you that we get 33.5 degrees for our missing angle. All right, so the first two had us solving for a missing angle. So we're doing the inverse. Let's look at a different example, example 3. All right, we've got a word problem, so I know I'm going to have a right triangle. All right, it tells me that a bird sits on top of a lamppost. So I've got my lamppost here coming down. All right, we've got our bird sitting on top of it. So let's give him some legs. Let's give him a body, a beak. Again, if your picture's not as good as mine, that's fine. I'm just really good at art. All right, there's our bird sitting on top of a lamppost. It tells us that there's an observer standing away from the lamppost, so we've got a person down here standing watching the birdie. All right, let's label our picture. All right, the angle of depression is 40, and remember that angle technically falls out here, which isn't in the triangle. So remember, angle of elevation or angle of depression, we're always going to put that angle down in the bottom corner. The distance from the bird to the observer, so from bird to the person, is 25 meters. How tall is the lamppost? So I'm going to put an X there. All right, let's go ahead and label our sides and figure out how to solve this. Start at our angle. This is opposite, hypotenuse, adjacent. There's nothing on A, so I'm left with O and H, so this is a sine. Sine of 40 equals opposite over hypotenuse. Remember, when X is on top of the fraction, it's going to be a multiplication, so I'm going to take 25 times sine 40. When I do that, it tells me that I get 16.1, and I'm going to label it feet because we were talking feet in the question. All right, so here's a little different case. We were solving for a missing side this time. Let's go ahead and do one more example, and then we'll go ahead and get into some practice. Example 4. We've got a word problem, and we're going to be solving using a right triangle. A ladder leaning against a house, so I've got a house here. Well, let's not block the question for you. So we'll go with the little mini house. Let's make it a nice window here. Maybe a door. All right, sweet. There's your good drawing for your house. All right, it tells us that there's a ladder leaning up against the house. So I've got a ladder that's leaning up against it. So here is my ladder leaning up against the house. You'll notice this forms a right triangle even with my beautiful picture. All right, let's go ahead and start to label our picture with the info they gave us. The angle of elevation is 78, so our angle is going to go down in the corner. It's looking up. The ladder is 5 feet from the building, so we're 5 feet away from the building. It wants to know how long is the ladder, so I'm going to put an X on that, and now I'm going to begin to solve it by labeling my sides. All right, let's go ahead and start at the angle and label our sides. This would be opposite, hypotenuse, adjacent. I have A and H, so this is a cos, so I'm going to take cos of the angle equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Now I notice X is on the bottom of my fraction, so this is a division, so I'm going to do 5 divided by cos 78, which tells me that X is approximately 24 feet. All right, so again, for each of our word problems, we're going to draw and label our picture. All right, angle of elevation and angle of depression, either way they say it, we're going to put it down in the bottom corner of our triangle. Remember, use those key words to help you label your picture. So how tall, how high, things like that. We gave you a little cheat sheet there to help you. Now we're going to go ahead and get into some practice.